Hello, church. This is Pastor Paul, and I'd like to share a few thoughts with you from chapter 6 of the book The Trellis and the Vine for Tuesday, July 7th, 2020. The author entitles this chapter Guilt or Grace, and he begins this chapter by asking the question, should we expect all believers to participate in God's work in the world? That is the idea of sharing the good news and making disciples of those who receive Jesus as their Lord and Savior. Should we expect all believers to participate in this work? And the author answers the question by saying that all Christians are partners in the gospel of grace. And he writes, according to the Apostle Paul, gospel partnership is the normal Christian life. It means standing together united in the gospel, determined to live as citizens of heaven in the midst of our corrupt generation, longing and striving to see the gospel be defended and proclaimed, and bravely copying the conflict, struggle, and persecution that inevitably follow. And he writes, there aren't two classes of Christians, the partners and the spectators. We're all in it together. And we're in it together not because of guilt, but we are to recognize that we are in it together because of God's grace, God's unmerited favor that he shows to us that makes us a part of his family. And it is by God's grace that we are given this commission. And in this chapter, the author looks to the letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Philippi in the first century. So it's the New Testament book of Philippians. And the Apostle Paul explicitly tells the church in Philippi that they are partners with him in the gospel ministry in Philippians chapter 1, verses 4 and 5. Here the Apostle Paul writes, in all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. The author continues by making several points in this chapter, and I'd like to share two of them. He says, first of all, believers must understand that embracing the gospel means that we are willing to suffer like Christ suffered. In Philippians chapter 1, verse 29, the Apostle Paul writes, for it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe on him, but also to suffer for him. Some people call this the idea of the cruciform life. And that is the idea that Christians are going to suffer when we do the gospel work, the same way that Jesus suffered when he did gospel work. And second, believers must remember that we are citizens of heaven, and we are to live in light of that. In Philippians 3:20, the Apostle Paul explicitly states that when he writes, but our citizenship is in heaven. And the author connects this with Philippians 1:27, where the Apostle Paul writes, whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then whether I come to see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in one spirit, contending as one man for the faith of the gospel. So the Apostle Paul is sharing with us here that as citizens of heaven, we are to live for the honor of our King Jesus. So we need to ask the question as we think about this chapter, are we all in? Are we all serving as partners in the work of the gospel, that is, sharing the good news of Jesus Christ with others and making disciples? Are we recognizing that we are citizens of heaven and our loyalty lies with our King Jesus, even if that means that we must suffer as he suffered? So, church, I'd just like to encourage you today with these thoughts. Remember that we are all partners together in the work that God is doing in the world, and that is sharing the good news of Jesus and making disciples of others. So I trust that you'll have a great and blessed day today.